Hello, listeners. Welcome to Marie Lives the Horror. This is episode 15 of the series of True Paranormal Ghost Stories. In this episode, I bring you 6 haunting tales of true paranormal experiences. So without further ado, step into my horror chamber as we live the horror together. Number 1. She's been following me for days. I've posted my experiences on here before, but the past few days, I feel like she's been there more. I don't know how to explain it. A feeling, just overall knowing, but she is there, and she will not leave me alone. It started with her a few days ago. Obviously, I was in my room, in one of the oldest rooms in this old 1880s house. It was about 2 a.m. and I felt this sinking drop. The one I get when someone is there. I froze and waited. Then I heard clearly, "Psst." My heart began to race as I sat there in absolute fear. I couldn't move. Eventually, the sinking feeling subsided, and I was left alone in the dark with my fear. She left the room, but she was still there. That was the first encounter. After that, I would have to go feed the animals in the barn every morning. I was hearing footsteps above me on the second floor. There's this hole in the ceiling above where the cat's food is. I heard someone get on the floor next to the 2x2 hole. I looked over and saw a piece of hair hanging down. I froze and watched as it was pulled back to the second floor. I ran so fast out of there, it wasn't even funny. I had to go feed the animals by walking through the pasture and going in from the back. After that, I started staying up later. I just couldn't sleep. I felt like something was watching me every night. This was 2 days ago. I was starting to fall asleep. It was only around 12:40, so it wasn't that late. I was almost asleep when I started hearing this children's music from my room. Then I saw the lady pulling me closer and closer until she was right in my face, and I got snapped back to reality. It freaked me out, but I blew it off. I tried falling asleep again. The children's music started, and she pulled me closer and closer until she was in my face, and I snapped back into reality again. I tried to sleep one more time, and the exact same thing happened. I felt my stomach drop. She was behind my door. I was so terrified. I picked up my stuff and ran as fast as I could and went to another room downstairs to try and sleep. I finally did fall asleep around 2:30 a.m. I'm not quite sure what she wants with me, and I'm not so sure I want to find out. All I know is that she is here, always around, just waiting. Number 2. My grandfather's house. I grew up with my parents and siblings in my grandfather's home from my father's side. The house still scares me. My grandparents still live there, as do two of my cats. If they go out of town, I check in with the cats daily, and I hate going alone. Important to note, I had 3 brothers at the time of these stories. All are younger. We were a very low-income family, so we all shared a room. My ghost experience with my cats seemed to interest a few of you, so I thought I'd share some of the things that made me hate this house. It's a long story, so hold on to your diapies. I lived in the same house for give or take 26 years. There was about 1.5 years, give or take, of living at my grandmother's house from my mother's side. When I was really young, I'd have serious nightmares. I hated sleeping alone, so I would often sneak into my parents' room and sleep with them. These nightmares weren't your typical monsters under the bed either, but that's a different story altogether. My grandfather likes to prop the attic door open for airflow, and it was right outside the bedroom door. The real interesting part? When the attic was closed, my nightmares almost completely went away. Not 100%, but decreased substantially. I remember hating when it was open because I always felt watched. When the attic was closed, I'd hear creaking from up there, right above my bedroom. My grandfather tried to say it's rats or raccoons, but it always sounded much heavier than that. Let's get to some of the scarier events. When I was about 8, my mom and I got into an argument. She left me at home to run to the store or something. I actually can't remember. As soon as she left, the atmosphere changed. I kept the front door open and sat in the living room. After a few minutes, the TV in our room turned on with just static. We had cables, so it should have been on something. When I walked towards the back, it shut off. This back and forth went on for a good 3 to 5 minutes before I finally screamed, "Stop it!" And it didn't turn on again. The closet next to the hall would open by itself on random. It wasn't overstuffed and would go days without opening, so it wasn't a pressure thing. The patio door that connected to the garage would slam at least once a week, even if it wasn't windy. Also, it was indoors. The house would shudder often. It was old, so it settled often, so this may or may not be connected. Things would vanish and reappear after you asked for it. This happened mostly to me, and I still tried to pretend it was just me being a teenager. But it happens in my current home, too. For example, I would look for my phone high and low, ask to have it back, and then I would find it on the kitchen counter in plain view. The cats always watch doorways and the damn attic door. I had a black shape run across my bed/feet, even though my black cat was outside, and the other cat was with me. There was also tapping on windows in mine and my parents' room. There was knocking on the front door, even when no one was there. This still happens at my new house. I would see orbs and images, but I no longer have them. I once woke up in the middle of the night to see someone sitting on the edge of my eldest brother's bed, hunched over. I thought it was him until I saw his form under the covers asleep. Figures would stand in the doorway, under the attic, or in front of the closet in the bedroom. I had a nightmare that I was bitten by an animal and woke up with a red patch in the same spot. I woke up in the middle of the night once when I was a teenager, and I felt cold air on my face, and then I heard someone say, "Hey." I went back to sleep and never told anyone because my dad's a skeptic. But about a month later, my dad was watching the TV in my room, looked at me and said, "What?" He heard someone say, "Hey," and thought it was me. It wasn't. Curtains would be open when no one was home all day, and they were closed when we left. My middle brother once told me a story about peeling off his face and being a skeleton. He and my youngest brother would say a lot of weird stuff, which was often creepy. My youngest brother and middle brother would sit up in the middle of the night and stare at things and then go back to sleep. I once had a nightmare of the house being destroyed and people standing around a bed while a child lay there, presumably dying. There is a ton of detail about this specific nightmare, but I won't go into it here. I never told anyone because why? A few months later, I told a couple of friends they could see a ghost if they looked through my window. No one was at home at the time. They screamed and told me they saw a little boy. Exact match to my nightmare. I've seen shadow people in the corners of my room. Sometimes the bedroom door would sway like someone touched it, and then just the overall feeling of doom. The house doesn't feel friendly. It feels like you're being watched from the back of the house, always around the attic. I like to keep every light on, because the shadows always just seem extra dark. I'm sure there are several more things. My mom admits stuff has happened to her, but has never said what. I never did any history on the house, and never want to. I'm afraid of what I would find. Some of this stuff could easily be explained away, but I don't really believe in coincidences. Thanks for sticking around for this long one. Number 3. My sinister spirit. I have been interested in the paranormal and unexplained events for as far back as I can remember. I have had and continue to have paranormal encounters, and it has become normal, although it still unnerves me. The most compelling story I tell to date refers to my haunting when I lived on a military base when I was 14 years old. It was roughly 2200 on a weekend night, and I had finished watching a horror film. I cannot remember which one. And I was inspired to make contact with the dead. I did 5 minutes of research on my laptop, clearly enough to be an expert on the matter, and sat on my bedroom floor in the dark. I placed my full-length mirror in front of me and leaned it against my bed and lit a candle. I stared at my reflection for what felt like forever, and finally muttered some gibberish along the lines of, "If there's anyone here, show yourself." And I am opening the gates to communication. Please come forth. I would pause and wait and stare at the mirror, focusing my eyes on the surroundings behind me. I waited for something to appear, but naturally nothing did. The longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable I became. I gave up after 10 minutes and called it a night. To this day, this is the only explanation I have as to how the haunting began. I had lived in the same house for 3 years prior and never experienced any paranormal activity. As previously stated, I was 14 years old and going through an angsty time in my life. Depression, self-harm, first heartbreak. I was emotionally negative, and part of me feels like whatever I welcomed into the house felt that energy. You see, now I know that when you want to make a connection with the deceased, you have to be specific about who you are contacting or what you are contacting. I left the door to communication open to anything that was listening, good or evil. I cannot recall how much time had passed since I performed that little stunt. Days, weeks. But my room suddenly became a playground for spiritual energy. My room was located in the basement, a spot I felt was cool and private for a teenager. I put up curtains to separate my room from the laundry area and the storage area where my father stored his military items in large olive green containers. I tell you this because it serves a purpose later on in my story. You know the feeling you get when you know you are not alone. The vibe of someone standing close to you, even though you haven't yet looked to see who is there. That is how I began to feel most of the time. So I decided to acknowledge this feeling and called out to whomever or whatever was in my room. I sat perfectly still on the floor and focused. The only sound I could hear was the sound of the television coming through the ceiling as the living room was above my room. If there is someone here, please knock twice, I demanded. I waited, held my breath, and of course heard no reply. I tried several more times, repeating the same words. The presence of someone else being near was so strong that the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and my anxiety skyrocketed. I noticed the room felt unusually colder. Naturally, a basement is fairly cold, so I was used to being slightly chilled. But this drop in temperature crept into my bones. I repeated my chant once more, and after no response, I gave up. As I stood, I heard 2 distinctive knocks on my cement bedroom wall above my bed. 1. Pause. 2. As if the knocker took great care to ensure I would hear. Not 1, not 3, but 2 knocks. Exactly what I had asked for. After that, I felt relieved and excited and accepted that I was not alone. It still stuns me to look back and think the knocker did not scare me. It just confirmed what I already knew, that someone else was in the basement. The odd thing was, it never bothered me. Not at first. I felt like I had accomplished what I set out to do. I contacted a spirit. I felt exhilarated and powerful. Although it never showed itself, I was aware of its presence. That said, it wasn't always present, but when it came, the air felt cooler and thicker, and the shiver would run up and down my spine. I could easily determine if it was beside me or behind me. Having a ghost for a roomie became my norm, and at first, I didn't mention it to my family. I also noted that I only felt its presence in the basement, never upstairs or in any other area of the house. So I never felt the urge to talk about it. This fact also stuns me because at the time, I was excited about it and would normally mention such an experience to my family and best friends. But for months, I kept it to myself. And as the months went on, my spirit became increasingly annoying and more malevolent. One evening, I was watching a movie, a favorite pastime in my room, when I felt the spirit's presence behind me. By this time, I would speak openly to it, as if a real person was standing there, and I think because I acknowledged it, it grew stronger somehow. I told the spirit that I was watching a movie and to leave me alone. Seconds went by, and all of a sudden, I felt it twirl a piece of my hair on the left side of my head. This was the first time something otherworldly had ever physically touched me, and I will never forget it. It was as if a real person was playing with my hair. I did not move and held my breath. My strand of hair felt like it would be released and then picked up again to be twirled through someone's fingers. It obviously shocked me to feel such a sensation when no one was visibly behind me, and I could not actually see the strand lift and spin, but I knew it was real. The action felt playful, as if the spirit was seeking my attention. Once again, it did not scare me, just surprised me. When it went for the strand a third time, I moved my head and yelled, "Stop! I am trying to watch my movie." My voice was laced with annoyance. The presence disappeared, and I returned to the film. This is only the beginning of my story, but I will stop here as this post is already long enough. I will link part 2 below if you are all interested. Number 4. I've had a few experiences. It's safe to say almost every house I have lived in has been haunted, plus the places surrounding my family. For context, I'm 17 now. Some of these experiences happened when I was younger, so some details might have been lost to the passage of time and just my bad memory in general. Some were told by my sister. We'll call her Kay for this. My mom also had experiences, and there's some of my own. I have organized these different stories in numerical order. 1. This story was told to me by Kay. She is 2.5 years older than me. When I was a baby, maybe around 1 year old, she went to check on me, and she saw 2 black cats sitting on top of me. So she yelled for my mom, but when she looked back and my mom had went into the room, both cats were gone and I was fine. This happened way before we got our first black cat. 2. This story was told to me by my mom. She used to work as a cleaner, and my dad worked late at an arcade as a security guard. Mom had gotten home pretty late, but before Dad got home. Kay and myself were asleep upstairs. I was maybe 4 or 5 at this point. She had sat down, and she heard running up and down on the landing upstairs, so she went up to check. No one was there. Here's a big detail. Whenever someone walked across that landing, the light fixtures in the living room would shake, and that's how Mom and Dad would know if Kay or I were up and about. Mom said the lights weren't shaking when she looked up. 3. Mom and Dad both had a paranormal experience at the same time. My mom told me this story as well. I think my grandfather on Dad's side had recently passed away when this happened. It was early, and Dad had just got up, and Mom was just starting to wake up. To put in perspective of their room, the bed took up basically half of the room. It was a very small room, while Kay and I had the biggest room. This was a 2-story house with 2 bedrooms. And a little bit of my parents' room was taken up by their wardrobe, and next to the bed was their door. My dad was at the wardrobe, facing towards the wall, when he was suddenly flung back towards the bed, and it shocked my mom awake. She sat up and saw Dad looked in shock and asked if he was okay. He didn't respond for a few seconds, then looked at my mom and said, "I swear I just heard my dad." Mom asked how and what he had said. He shook his head and then said, "He said he was sorry because he didn't recognize me." I seem to also remember my mom saying, "The door opened a crack a few minutes before our dog at the time, whose name was Max, had pushed the door the rest of the way open with his face, then padded in and plonked himself down at the door and just stared out into the landing." 4. I can't remember this very well, but I remember seeing an apparition when I was 8 in my room. That's all I can remember. I don't think I ever saw it again, though I did have some very vivid nightmares of an old man. I can't remember what happened though. 5. Mom told me a third-party paranormal experience. From what I remember, she said the night worker at her old store was looking at the CCTV after feeling someone tap them on the shoulder when they were doing a store face-up, and they saw a trolley had been left out at the end of an aisle. It suddenly rotated, so the trolley was facing towards the aisle just before they felt the tap. 6. This story is more closer to the present day. In my current home, a first floor flat, I have seen 3 orbs, 2 inside my room right above my bed, and 1 in the hallway. Each time the orbs immediately went towards the living room, right next to my room. 7. Mom has also seen 2 orbs when she was walking out of the living room or going from her room to the living room, practically right next to it, like my room is. 8. Kay has had her clothes pulled by something that wasn't a living person in the bathroom. I saw the aftermath to this, and I was with her at the time. Kay has also had vivid nightmares. She has woken up on the floor in her room with her cover folded over her, like she was carefully taken out of bed. She has had a book, which was gifted from her boyfriend, thrown at her by an unseen force, and saw an apparition of a man with a Cheshire smile and a bowler hat late at night at her door. She's also seen this man in the afternoon in the reflection of the balcony door through the reflection of the kitchen window, which is directly opposite the living room. There have been 4 deaths in the house we've lived in. Apparently, the grandparent of one of my former friends died in my room at my old house, where Mom had heard running and Dad got pushed by my grandfather's ghost. And the previous owner of the flat had died, but not inside the flat. He died at a nursing home, and he didn't wear a bowler hat. He wore what's kind of described as a trucker hat. We didn't know the history of any of our houses that well. Here's a bonus story. I remember this kind of vividly, and I'm about 40% sure it was because I suffered auditory hallucinations as a kid. I still kind of do, but not as bad. Or it was some sort of nightmare. And I'm 60% sure a demon tried to come for my adolescent butt and was stopped by a couple of doors. I used to go and help my dad with shopping when I was really little. There was one point where Dad had taken me to a shop and we were walking back home, and we took a shortcut he knew past this building. I don't know what it was, but it had no windows. Any window holes were boarded up, and it had stairs leading up to 2 heavy metal doors that were chained shut with a visible lock. Dad had walked ahead, and I was just passing the doors when I heard a loud bang. And I looked towards the doors as they sort of went back to being fully closed. And I heard what sounded like a xenomorph hiss. I had never watched Alien at this point. I was 5 years old in this story. And it scared the heck out of me, and I ran to catch up with my dad. He never heard or saw anything, but I did. I still don't know what that building was used for, but I passed it once before we moved, and I only ever saw one person leave it, and that was so he could lock it up again. I also recall another thing with Kay's experience. We have 2 cats in the flat. Their names are Elvis and Zeppelin. Elvis is a black cat, and Zeppelin is a black and white cat. At times, they acted weird around Kay's room, It's directly beside the bathroom, and it's also the smallest room. And Kay has recorded their behavior before and has captured at least up to 10 orbs on video. Number 5. Clifftop Apartment. I've been to many holiday destinations in and around Europe, but one place always stands out. This place will remain anonymous, but it is nestled on the west coast of England. The west coast is normally very beautiful, but this particular resort is one of the creepiest. Somewhere I will never return. The story begins when I was 14, and my parents booked a holiday through an advert in the local paper. The place was cheap, too cheap for the peak season, but my parents thought it must have been a cancellation. The journey was long, and I remember approaching the town with dread. The place was made of a dark granite buildings, surrounded by dark mountains, and didn't have your average holiday town feel. The last town we passed was vibrant and picturesque, but this place was something out of the abyss. My mom assured me that it would get brighter as we got nearer to the sea, but we entered a thick forest area that seemed to lead to a dead end. We eventually saw the sign for the holiday apartments and continued up a very steep road that eventually brought us to our location. Once we made it to the top of the cliff, we were greeted with a very old and tired holiday complex. My first impressions of the apartment were neutral. The decor and amenities looked dated, but it was clean and tidy. The living room and kitchen were positioned at the top entrance of the apartment, and you walk down a dark corridor to the bedrooms and bathroom. The lower half of the apartment had a totally different atmosphere to the entrance. My bedroom was icy cold, with little to no light, and the bathroom felt like someone was hiding in there with you. We unpacked our stuff and headed out to explore the town. We were in the middle of August, and the place was dead. Probably a handful of tourists, and the shops were quiet, if not closed. Restaurants and pubs were in the minority, and I couldn't see any sort of attractions or even visitor landmarks. As well as this, the place had a gloomy feel. It felt like everyone had fled to escape someone or something, and I hated it. My parents tried to remain cheerful, but it was obvious they regretted coming here. We returned to the apartment, and we were met with an ice-cold chill. The corridor seemed darker than normal, and the feeling of being watched had returned. I didn't sleep well that night, and I kept hearing my dad pacing the corridor back and forth. He even came to check in on me and asked if I was okay. I eventually went to sleep and woke up relieved that I had survived my first night. We stayed for a few days, but cut the holiday short and tried a new town. The owner didn't seem surprised by this and made the comment that most people decided to leave early. It wasn't until we returned home that my dad revealed the true reason for cutting things short. He explained that every night he would hear someone moving up and down the corridor. He went out to check the apartment, but he could never find anything. He would also hear someone crying outside my room. He thought it was me at first, but there was never anyone there, and I was always fast asleep. The scariest event happened on our last night. My dad claimed he woke up at 2 a.m. and heard voices coming from the living room. He initially thought he had left the TV on and went up to check. When he entered the room, the TV was off and nobody was there. He turned around to go back to his room and saw a black shadow move from the kitchen and towards the corridor. He ran out of the room, but nothing was there. He returned to bed, but said he was again woken up by noises. He recalled hearing footsteps outside, which stopped directly outside their bedroom. On inspection, there wasn't anyone or anything there. Earlier that morning, he had got chatting to one of the locals, who gave him the history of the town. 50 years ago, there had been a terrible storm, which caused devastating flooding and killed hundreds of the town's inhabitants. Buildings were destroyed, and part of the cliff top came away. It took a long time for the town to rebuild itself, and it was never the same again. Number 6. Haunted record player. I bought my dad a vinyl record player so he could revisit some of his old music a few years back. This was a very old one that I had got from a flea market, with a slot that you would push the needle into when not in use. Anyways, we have quite a small house, and my room had a comfy chair and lots of space, so we put it in there. And from time to time, I would find my dad sitting there with his huge headphones blasting some old rock record. After a while, I started having weird dreams about the record player, and after a while, I realized that they weren't dreams, as I woke up and realized that the record player was playing at night. I told my dad the next day, but he brushed it off and said that he probably forgot to put the needle back into its slot. The next night, I made sure that the needle wasn't anywhere near the record, but yet again, it started playing. Needle on the record, spinning like no tomorrow. The autoplay would continue every night for weeks, and after a while, I noticed a pattern. I was an avid gamer in my day, so I had a lot of late nights on weekends. When I was gaming, I would notice the record player starting to play, and I would check the time, 3:12 a.m., every single night. I even looked into it to see if the player had some sort of automatic timer on it. Nope. According to the manufacturer's manual, at least. I would continue to find myself waking up every single school night of some old beat blasting through the headphones. I then started to remove the record from the player. This time, no music, only static. I would have unplugged it, but the outlet was behind a huge, heavy entertainment center in my room. Unplugging the headphones would only toggle those small speakers in the record player. One night, though, the static woke me up yet again, and I could hear faint noises through the static, eerily similar to the noises a fiddle makes. I jumped out of bed noped the entertainment center out of my way, unplugged the record player, and carried it into another room. It hasn't been used since, as it scared my dad shitless when I told him the full story. A few years passed and I started seeing this girl, and it turns out that her grandmother is the one I bought the record player from. We went to this lady for coffee one time, and I jokingly said, "That vinyl record player you sold me was haunted." And she just shrugged and asked me what I meant. Well, it would start playing by itself at 3:12 a.m. every single night and would attach the needle onto the record and everything. She stood up and left the room. After a few minutes, she came back and gave me a piece of paper. It was the death certificate of her late husband. His time of death, 3:12 a.m. Turns out, he had a stroke and died in the hospital. After a few minutes of letting this sink in, a picture caught my eye. Her late husband playing the fucking fiddle. Biggest nope ever. That record player was thrown into the fire on bonfire night. Hello, listeners. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Paranormal Ghost Stories as you live the horror with me. If you would like to submit some of your own true paranormal experiences for me to narrate on this channel, check the description down below and send them over to my email. Do not forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell to keep up with future episodes. Thanks for listening. I am your host, Marie Lives the Horror.